Welcome to Poultry Nerds. We're here today with Bronwen Brune from Queen Bee Farm. And I have already asked her middle name does not start with a B because that would be too convenient. So welcome, Bronwen. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure. So tell us about your farm, where you are, all the good stuff.
Yeah. So we are middle-ish Missouri, more towards between Columbia and St. Louis, Missouri is where we land. We just started all of this shenanigans about 2017 or so, whenever we moved out of suburbia and got our little patch of dirt. It started with, hey, that outbuilding would make a great chicken coop.
Oh
And then,
God.
and my husband was like, yeah, I can do that. And then like several years later, I was like, else would make a good chicken coop.
The chickens did you start with in that little one building?
Yeah, probably 15-ish, I feel is the right answer.
Okay. And then chicken math took over?
It was on accident. I didn't mean it.
What had happened was,
It was definitely, legitimately not on purpose. I had no intention of being where I am. I more or less just went with what circumstances provided me and ran with it, but it was definitely not my intent. I had some poultry background. I grew up on a farm. We didn't have poultry. Okay, so do you guys know Elmira Duff, the little cartoon on the Looney Tunes who likes to love and hug and squeeze everything?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's me in a nutshell. So whenever I was little and grandma had chickens, and of course they were just production chickens, I was like, these birds look like they have a hunk of ham on their head. And also, they won't let me catch them and squeeze them and love them. So I really didn't have any interest. I was more of a kitten, barn cat, beagle puppy, calf kind of kid growing up. I was not used for these birds. They don't like me. They don't
Mm.
allow me to squeeze them. So I didn't really have any interest. So fast forward to now, I had no idea that this would ever be anything that interests me or that I would even enjoy. So yeah. And then next thing you know, here we are.
So growing up, I thought for the longest time that they were leghorns, but then Dad told me one day they were white rocks. But it doesn't matter. They were just maniacs that tried to eat
Yes.
me all the time.
Yes.
I swore once I left home, I would never have chickens again.
Yeah. Mom and dad had some geese at one point in time and scared the daylights out of me, and they would chase me out of the barn. I was trying to feed the cows and couldn't. I was little, and my dad finally stood behind me and was like, you are going to walk into that barn. And I remember crying my face off. I was so scared of him. I was like, I'm never having any kind of poultry.
But like
Never.
geese bite.
There.
Had them bite me on the leg when I was a kid.
When you're only 3 feet tall, they are very scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never thought, like I said, I'm a barn cat, beagle puppy, cow kind of girl. Grew up as a poultry person. So I didn't have this on my bingo card.
So what kind of animals do you have now?
So we dabbled in ducks for a hot second, and that was also not on purpose. And I don't really have a ceiling for the number of chickens I can maintain, but I absolutely have a ceiling for how many ducks I want to have. I just don't have this setup, right? Like I don't have a natural water source. So it was constantly flipping out kiddie pools and all that mess with keeping up with them. And I only had like 2 or 3, and even that was way enough. So we passed on the ducks. So just chickens right now. We have dogs, we have cats. The list is still incomplete. I need to retire before we can expand.
Just do it in the meantime.
I know. It's just
Just live on the
literally
edge. Who needs sleep?
I don't know how that goat got in a barn. That's weird. So that's how this whole thing has evolved. But yeah, so far, just dogs, cats, and the birds outside.
All right. So the reason why we brought you on today was because you are creating mottled Brahmas from scratch.
Yes. Yeah, I did that.
That is a science project, and
Isn't it?
I need to know how that works. How do you
Okay,
do that?
so it started with a mean rooster. That was really the catalyst for all of this. When we were picking out our first flock, my daughter and her best friend were sitting down and they were flipping through the hatchery catalog. My only request was that it was Missouri Tiger themed. So I want black and gold chickens. That's it. Get black ones, get gold ones, get black and gold ones. That was my only requirement. And so they picked out a menagerie of birds. Everything was good. And they were like, we need to pick a rooster. I was like, yeah, we need to pick a rooster. So then eeny, miny, mo landed on a rooster, picked it. Everything was fine. He was a little bit of a spaz growing up. And then he got mean, just like most hatchery roosters do. I'm not even going to say the breed because it's not even important, but he was a menace. And for a year or two, my mom had a flock at this point. She got birds just a few years before I did. And she got several breeds, but she got some Buff Brahmas. And I was completely in love. My inner Elmira Duff was all about these birds. Like I could just scoop them up and kiss them and hug them. And my 30-something-year-old self was so happy. I was like, this is it. So I was like, I definitely want to get more of those. So that's what hooked me into Brahmas. And I definitely included them in my black and gold menagerie. And then this mean rooster, my mom had a mix or something, mean rooster. And so I just assumed that's how it is. Like they're just jerks and you just have to go out with a tennis racket and that's how it is.
One way to do it.
And so then I was like, my friends down the road got a large fowl black Cochin. And so again, my inner Elmira Duff was like, oh, I need that in my life. And so I went on the search for a large fowl Cochin just because I wanted a nice rooster because he was nice. And found a lady in Columbia, Missouri, actually, that raises mottled large fowl black Cochins, which is pretty hard to find unless you're Jamie Matz or some of his folks. And I was like, yes, I will take him. So literally, I only wanted him because he was sweet. And she said, well, he's mottled. I was like, cool, because I don't even know what that means.
Like, okay.
That's nice. Is he big? Yes. Is he black? Yep. Cool. Check. I'll take him. So I bring him home. He's the sweetest thing ever. He's like a front porch dog. I was in love. And the rotten rooster, I was like, oh, that is absolutely enough of you. And nobody needs to tolerate this, actually. And I made it like my mission to make sure everyone knows that nice roosters exist. That was like my whole thing. Like, I am going to cross this big, sweet boy with my Buff Brahmas, which I love so much. And I'm just going to create giant, heavily feathered, sweet birds. That was my absolute goal after Mizzou tiger themed birds. And so whenever I asked questions about it, I was like, what color will they be? And someone told me chicken colors are like melting crayons. So if you take a black crayon and you melt it with a yellow crayon, you're going to get black birds. I was like, oh, okay. So sure enough, when we bred them together, we had black chicks. And I was like, works just like melting crayons. No big deal. So that's how that first generation started. They were solid black, all of them. They had vulture hocks. I didn't know what that means. They were split to mottling. I didn't know what that means. Some of them had leakage. I didn't know what that means. I didn't care. It wasn't my goal. And so in the meantime, I'm like just perpetuating these sweet birds and speckling them across the counties next to me. And a family from Illinois comes and they said, we would love some hatching eggs. And I was like, sure. Because they fell in love with Buckbeak, who was the large fowl mottled Cochin. I'm like, oh man, we would love his babies. I'm like, everybody wants his babies. I know, he's the best. So they took hatching eggs. They hatched them. In the meantime, she's keeping up with me, sending me pictures. And she sends me a picture of a buff bird that has mottling. And I was like, that doesn't make sense because I thought it was like melting crayons. And all of these birds are black. And so tell me how black birds made this bird. And so for the next 6 months, amongst chasing kids around ball fields and all the things, I was like, what in the world? How the heck did I do this? How is this even possible? And he grew and I was like, what in the world? So finally I figured out how I did it, why I did it, the genetics behind how it happened. And I don't know, I sent her with a dozen, 18, maybe something like that, eggs, just backyard mutts. And she only had one that looked like him. She would not sell him back to me. Yeah. And so I was like, if I did it once, I can do it again. So then I was like, I still have all the birds that made him, so I'll just do it again. So that set in motion my short walk off the deep end. And so at this point, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to turn eggs in the middle of the night in a styrofoam incubator that's still air, and doing all these dumb things and asking stupid questions and face planting and learning and all the things. And I finally figured out that this was actually pretty hard. And that one bird that was hatched out of those 12 or 18 eggs was a unicorn. And going forward, this was going to be pretty miserable to try to repeat that. But I was just determined and dumb. And so I was like, I'll just keep going. So that second generation, I hatched just a bonkers load of birds trying to find another buff bird that was mottled. So basically all of these birds were black, but since they were a cross between a black and a buff, they were still carrying all of those genetics. They were all split to mottled. So now I know I only had a 25% chance of getting any mottled birds out of that cross in the first place, which was low. And then on top of that, even less, that would be buff mottled. And on top of that, even less, that wouldn't have vulture hocks, because at that point I realized if I'm going to raise Brahmas, I need to extinguish the vulture hocks, because that's a DQ. So really, we're talking like single digit percentages on what I would actually produce that fell within my criteria.
Nothing major.
Yeah, no big deal. Like I'm just carrying along, like sprinkling birds across everybody's backyard. Nope, this one won't work. But during that process, during that second generation, I was producing some number of black mottled without vulture hocks. And initially I was just discarding them because I was like, that's not my goal. And then eventually I was like, you know what? Maybe I could just use these second generation black mottled as a byproduct of this effort trying to get Mille Fleur and split off another project. Like I'm creating them. They're sitting right in front of me. They don't have vulture hocks. They're black. They're fully mottled. Maybe I can use that. So at that second generation is when I split and was like, okay, there's the Mille Fleur effort, which is abysmal and long and hard. It makes me feel like a failure most days. And then there's the mottled. And so I was like, okay. And so at that point, at that second generation, I only had 2 pullets out of, I don't know, probably 200 birds I hatched out of that second generation. It was a lot. That were fully mottled, black, no leakage, visible anyway, and no vulture hocks. And so those 2 girls are what catapulted the entire mottled project. So
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So the Cochin was the male. What was the hens that you were using?
Buff Brahmas, and they were hatchery quality Buff Brahmas. Looking back, like they're terrible. They were not good stock. They were like hatchery, but maybe just a little below hatchery quality. There's other hatchery quality Buff Brahmas that look definitely better than what I started out with, for sure.
Okay, so now you're at the end of the second generation, and you've got 2 pullets, and you still got your male.
Yeah. So I decided not to go back to him because my girls, even though they're granddaughters of his, they're still favoring a decent amount of Cochin type. I was like, I need to somehow get away from the Cochin type. Their cushions were a little wonky. There's still some things. They didn't have vulture hocks, but they certainly didn't reflect the proper Brahma type. So I reached out to Beach Bum down in Florida, and Amy was like, I was like, what do you have for males? And she just gave me the rundown. I'm like, my girls need this. They need a better top line. They need longer legs. They need obviously a better peak comb because we're still working through that. I'm like, but they have decent leg feathering from the Cochin influence. But these are the things I need. And Amy was like, I think I have the guy for you. So she picked what I was looking for to complement my girls' shortcomings. And she sent this blue male up, which at that point I was like, I'll take black or blue. Like it doesn't really matter. But because she sent me a blue, now that diversified what I have. She sent him up. I used him to produce that third generation. They were, of course, all splits. I went heavy culling on type. Didn't care, obviously, because they weren't showing any mottling in that third generation. I guess I feel like where maybe I could have done differently hindsight's 2020, if I would have known what I know now. Back in that first generation, some of those girls probably had better type that I wasn't focusing on at the time. At that point, those F1 black girls, I was just looking for big, heavily feathered, big girls. I wasn't focusing on any kind of type. So had I focused on that early on, I probably would have made bigger gains later on. But I was just living my Elmira Duff life. I just want sweet birds. So at the point that these third generation birds were produced, then I was really dialing in, and I really focused hard on recessive genes, whether it is eliminate recessive genes or whether I need to promote recessive genes. One of my biggest things I hear people say all the time, it drives me bonkers, is you got to build the barn before you paint it. Well, that's nice and all, but have you ever actually done this from scratch? Because if you've ever done this from the absolute bottom up, you cannot follow that mantra. You cannot paint a barn white if you are not bringing the white bucket along with you as you go. You can't get there. You'll never get there. So whenever, like yellow shanks, for example, obviously these are black birds and or bluebirds now at this point. They don't want to have yellow skin. They don't want to. It is very hard to promote that yellow skin on a black bird. So that was hard. If I let go of yellow shanks because it's a color attribute, if we're going to go with that, and I'm just looking at type and I only select for type, I'm going to lose that yellow shank. If I never select for mottling, I'm never going to have a mottled bird. So it's not a one size fits all statement, in my opinion. It is a balance between type and color when you are working like this from the bottom up. When you don't have exhibition quality to start and you're trying to claw for every little attribute you can with each generation, you're crossing a bird with a beautiful skull to a bird with a crow head, hoping that somehow somebody gets long legs out of the bed. Like, you're really in the trenches of that. And it's just not a one size fits all statement in those cases. I understand why people say it. But
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
The mottling gene,
Yes.
is that a recessive?
It is.
Okay. The male and the female both carry it?
You got it. It is not sex linked. It actually doesn't inhibit or promote or do anything with any other color or pattern. It is literally a standalone gene that performs or doesn't perform based on whether it's homozygous or not.
So your third generation, you said was it your third generation wasn't showing any mottled at all?
They were all split.
So everybody was heterozygous?
You got it. And I knew
Faith right there.
It had to be, because my two girls were homozygous.
Okay.
And my boy didn't carry any mottling genetics from Florida at all. So the girls gave every single one of their babies one copy.
We'll be right back.
Looking to rock some seriously comfy gear? If you love chickens and you're all about that fun style, then Chicken Box has got the perfect t-shirts for you. From quirky designs to classic looks, their shirts are as comfy as us chicken tenders deserve. They even have a subscription service so your coop doesn't get bored. Head over to PoultryNerdsPodcast.com and click on Chicken Box to get your comfy shirts and support the podcast.
Wow.
So keeping records has, of course, been a thing. You can definitely get somewhere with carriers. So you can make progress with heterozygous birds, whether it's heterozygous lavender, heterozygous mottled, whatever the gene is that you want to promote. You can get there with heterozygous birds, but you've got to really keep tight records, especially with lavender. I don't even talk about that because I don't even have lavender on the farm because but like mottling, at least mottling, there's an advantage there to other recessive genes. With mottling, you can see if they are a carrier when they are chicks. So you can see that chick down and that juvenile feather pattern. You can see whether they carry mottling or whether they don't have any mottling. You can see it.
What are you looking for?
So sometimes they just have tiny little white tips on their feet or their wings or maybe on their head, but it's a certain snapshot in time that gives you that data. So as babies and as juveniles, you can see it. But the minute they start to feather out into their adult feathering, it's gone. And you will never know that they carry mottling ever again unless you have them banded. And for certain, as chicks, they showed it because it'll be gone in their adult feathers.
So Jamie told me one time that in their armpits, if they have white feathers in their armpits, they carry the mottled gene.
Yeah, that could be. I've not found that to be the case. I still have my F1 girls here, a handful of them that are still toddling around, and they are jet black toe tip. There's not a single speck of white on them at all. Yeah, it is tricky. So the modeling was, I don't want to say fall off a log easy, but I feel like the modeling was not too terrible. The Mille Fleur has been, like I said, extremely challenging and abysmal. And at least the modeling has taken off. So at the point that those F3s were hatched and I was able to then, because they were only carriers for modeling, that F generation, back to that whole paint the barn or build the barn before you paint it. In that F3 generation, I really did focus on type only because there was nothing to focus on color. They were only heterozygous for it. I had worked out that every other generation, I was focusing on one or the other to keep them moving forward. So that third generation, I really hammered down pretty hard on type. And then in that fourth generation, I was back to the original where I was only going to produce 25% that were modeled. And so again, that fourth generation was a ton of chicks to hatch. I really dialed in hard on the birds that reflected the best type and that were also homozygous modeled. I could have kept back others, but I really wanted to cull hard and get there. And so at that point, then I knew like I can stop worrying about modeling because it's perpetuated now. Everybody's homozygous and I don't need to worry about it. So basically from generation 4 on, now it's all about building the barn because my bucket of white paint has followed me all along the way and I haven't lost it or left it along the way. But yeah, I think one of the biggest struggles for Brahmas and projects is we only have 3 accepted varieties. There's not a lot out there to, you only have just a select small genetic pool of genes that you can use to create anything. And so it becomes tricky with this particular breed to create anything novel without outcrossing. Same thing that Bumble Hollow Farm said. They get a lot of comments about those aren't real Brahmas and these aren't purebred and all the things. And I was like, do you guys think a stork came and dropped these birds with all these colors on it? What do you think? How do you think that we got here? Like, of course, that's the only way to do it.
You have to really understand genetics. So are you still getting single combs?
Yo, absolutely. Last year, I got a lot of single combs. So
Single combs are recessives. You have
Yes.
2 copies for them
Yes.
to show. Now, I
Yes.
have Cochins. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yes. Big
Okay.
old sweet boys and girls. I know. I love them.
So where you were talking about, we're just going to expand on some of the things you brought up. So the yellow skin,
Yes.
the black pigment of the feathers wants to leak into the skin and dull the yellow.
It sure does.
So it's very important to pay attention to those itty bitty tiny details.
Got it.
So on the Cochins, you look at the pads of their feet because those are the first things that kind of gray out.
Gotcha. Yeah, I found that in that third generation, when I was really dialed in on type, I was picking apart my leg color pretty hard in that generation and culling out any of those grays. I just know you've got 2 things working against you. Number 1, it's recessive, but number 2, exactly like you said, the black feather pigment does not want to be yellow. I learned at that point that it's not necessarily sex linked, but it is sex expressed. So typically, I was finding my males are nice and bright yellow compared to their sisters, for example. The girls are really struggling with that pigment, but the males in that same hatch group look decently bright. And it's not a sex-linked trait, but it is sex expressed. So at that point, I was like, gotcha. Okay. In that case, all of my males must have yellow. That has to happen. And the girls, I gave a little bit more grace to if their leg color wasn't quite as bright, just because I knew that was going to be a harder road to hoe to get them there. But yeah, you're exactly right. It is tough on any black bird that requires yellow shanks.
Mottled Brahmas, you want yellow skin.
You got it. That's the
Gotcha.
standard for Brahmas. Yep.
Okay, and then on the center and the outer toe,
You got
what
it.
about on the Brahmas?
Same. So they should not have vulture hocks, which I know is a big, sometimes there's a lot of conversation about whether Cochins have vulture hocks or not. The definition of vulture hocks, if we're talking Mille Fleur, the Duclays, which have, or the Sultans, which have the really stiff vulture hocks versus the Cochins, which have a much softer curl to their leg feathering. It's a combination of genes that creates vulture hocks. And in the Cochins, it's a softer culmination of those feathers. But when you cross a Cochin to a Brahma, and the Brahma has no vulture hocks, you 100% get chicks with vulture hocks. So it's that combination of genes, that heavily feathered skirt that the Cochins have, and the fact that their feather quality is so soft. Yeah, every single one of my first generation birds had vulture hocks, and I had to weed it out with that second generation push.
So a Brahma is a harder feathered bird.
It should be, yes.
So how are you going to move from a soft feather to a harder feather?
Keep on going. I've definitely seen in my birds over the years a much fluffier cushion, if you will. So that speaks to that softer feather, and it just speaks to the overall type for sure. The cushion has been something, and I think it's not unique to me. I think it's unique to most project birds. That cushion is really a bear to get. Like if you think about a light Brahma in that beautiful clean sweep that they see, that nice flat sweep, and then you think like you see some of these project birds where their wings are tucking in and they have a waist, and then poof, out comes their cushion. I had the same issue. So I went to the Ohio National and exhibited for the first time in November, which was fantastic. I've been to one poultry show before that. So this was my second poultry show, and I went to the Ohio National, brought 11 birds. Again, that short walk off the deep end part. And so I was like, I'm doing it. So I went, and I was so excited. I was so nervous, getting all my birds tucked into their cages like a mom with their kid going to school on kindergarten or something. And then finally, when I stopped, looked around me at the other Brahmas that were in the cages around me, I was like, oh, dang. I have a long way to go. You think your birds look great, and then you look up and you're like, oh, no. Yeah, they're trash. Okay. Gosh, there's just so much. And that rigidity of feather, the feather quality being thin versus thicker feather quality, all of those things. Once I got my hands on other exhibitors' birds, of course, with their permission, and they on mine, I was like, okay, yeah, I see what y'all are talking about now. Yeah, such an eye-opening experience. Wonderful, of course, but yeah, it was a lot to take in for sure.
I saw your birds at the Ohio National, and they stood up pretty well to the ones next to them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But the ones that I brought were young. I think their other birds that were pullets in the exhibit hall were also the same age, and they just were not the right size. So when I went home, I was like, okay, we got to get serious about amping up the size of these suckers. We've got to get bigger, and we've just got to get there. The birds that I exhibited were just my fifth generation. In my first and second generation, once I decided that this is what I was going to do, I would get there in what, a couple years? Blind ambition.
As you're trying to get rid of some of the Cochin stuff and transform it over, my odd question, I'm just wondering, how many generations before you got rid of the beetle brow?
So Brahmas
don't have that, right?
They are supposed to have it.
As heavy as a Cochin?
I'm probably the last person to answer that question specifically, but yeah, they are definitely supposed to be like resting Brahma face, angry beetle brow. Like they are definitely supposed to have that heavy
Resting Brahma face. That's what we're calling it.
They're definitely supposed to have that heavy brow. Some of the exhibition lights are so heavy, real similar to the Cochins. I think maybe you don't see it as often in the exhibit halls because you're not seeing as many quality Brahmas that have that attribute. But yeah, they really are supposed to have that big old knobby bonker head like they're can't see.
So if somebody doesn't know what a beetle brow is, that's like where like that was that guy from Dennis the Menace. His eyebrows were really tiny and they hung down.
Yeah.
So like on my Cochins, if you come up above them, like they're sitting at your feet and you come down on them, they cannot see you.
Yes.
Their brow is so heavy.
Yes.
Like they're blind. They looking up.
They should look like the red Angry Bird. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. That's how they should look. So in that respect, that should be something we perpetuate through the line. I think one of the harder things just in Brahmas in general is to get that length of back. And that's something I've really struggled with. And that's just been a selection thing over time. Just keep picking the ones out that are just a little bit wider and a little bit longer. And over time, you finally get to a place, I hope. But yeah, I think that length of back is really another thing. I've got a several with a shorter back. Maybe they have a nice sweep, and maybe they don't have that pinched waist and that fluffy cushion, but they certainly still have a short back.
I think that's something that we work on a lot of breeds. This year, that's one of my points on the Orpingtons. And so one of my mentors said that I need to put my hands on the backs of the boys, and instead of standing to the side and looking at their profile, how long is their back, you actually need to put your hands on them and feel their back and make sure that end of that bone continues on and it's not just being exasperated by the fluff per se.
One of my mentors, Lisa, at the Ohio National, she had her hands on mine as well. And she let me, of course, she was exhibiting hens, not pullets, but at the same time, like just the mass of these birds between the darks. She and Scott were both exhibiting darks at that time. And just the mass on these birds was just incredible. She said, go into your coop and either be blindfolded or do it at night so you're not biased, because I definitely have seen myself over the time and over the years get coop blind and be biased to my own. I had someone come to my coop one time and they're like, I wouldn't use that one. I'm like, what? What do you mean that one? Why do you mean not that one? It was one of my Mille Fleur pens. And she was like, I think he has a squirrel tail. I was like, shut up. He does. Has he been there this whole time? How did I not?
You do get coop blind.
You do. And Lisa recommended, she's like, go into your coops with a blindfold or do it at night and just feel them. Touch them, feel them. So you are not biased on who you're touching and what. Like, then just make some decisions based on what you're feeling. I was like, ooh, that's a good idea. Yeah. Because even still, yeah.
So one of the Orpingtons that I ended up choosing to go in the breeder pen, which actually went in a couple of days ago, he was one that I had actually thrown out to be put in the pot. And he was out growing out. And after you have these conversations with your mentors on what to look for and stuff, and I pulled up on the gator out to the barn and he's standing there looking at me and I was like, that's what he was talking about right there.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have
Yeah.
a lot else going for him, but I can use his progeny for going forward.
So I am super picky about my males. I actually don't make any decisions on my girls until I have solidified my males, because I find that it is so difficult to get the males. I feel like you're covering the whole pen. It's a lot of power in that genetic pool from your male. And so since my girls, my F2 girls, were only just a handful of generations away from a Buff Brahma, even though they weren't my girls weren't showing any leakage, I knew they were packing it. And so when I bred them to the beach bum guy in that third generation, I got oodles of leakage out of those progeny. And so I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm picking it all out. So there were beautiful males, nice top lines, long legs, beautiful combs. I'm like, do the pot, do the pot, do the pot. You're leaking. And out of that F3 generation, I got 2 boys out of all those babies that did not show leakage, 1 black and happened to be 1 blue. And at that point, I was like, okay, we're starting clans. So that was clan 1 and clan 2. And the black one's type was not good. It was not good, but he was crispy. He had no leakage. I was like, we got to work on that, because that's going to be hard to get rid of. And I knew it was coming from my girls. At the end of the day, once I've selected my males, I'm down to just a handful that are not leaking, that have decent type and all the things. Then I circle up my girls and pick who's going to compensate them. So this year, I've been able to start a 3rd clan. So finally now I have 3 clans going with clean males. I understand that the right way to do it to get rid of leakage is single mating. I'm not in it. I'm not in it. So I can do it. I don't know. I have the space, time, energy, all the things. I know it's the right thing to do, and maybe someday, but I don't know. It's just a lot of girls in single cages, and I don't know. I work outside the home full time. This should be fun for me. And I resonated so much with your podcast with the United Orpington. Was she the
Sarah?
president? Yeah. I resonated so much with what she said. And she was like, if you don't like what you're feeding out there, like I've said the same thing. Like, the day that this is not fun for me or enjoyable for me if this is not satisfying my inner Elmira Duff and I can't go out there and scoop up these birds and squeeze them and hug them, and maybe that makes me less of a breeder because that's important to me. I don't care. It's fun for me. And if the day that becomes not fun for me, like, this is too hard for this to not be enjoyable. Like, stop around in the winter and all the things.
We have to remind ourselves that this is our farm and this is our rules, and we're the only ones really that we need to please.
Yeah. It's just a bird. It's not that deep. Yeah. So I think if I had to go to single mating and I had to build an infrastructure to support that, yes, I could. Would it be fun for me? Probably not. Oh, man. I'm just not there. Maybe I will never be there. I don't know. So at any rate, I just try to select the clean males and keep like diluting out that leakage. I would say now, finally, I'm down to about 10% of my boys out of every hatch that are leaking. So that's a far cry from where I was. I was more like 85% at the beginning. So I don't know. I'll just keep chipping away at it. I'm not in a race. I'm not winning anything. I'm just here for trying to improve anyway.
So let's wrap up a little bit. Where is this project in the APA system?
Nowhere.
Okay.
So that's the other thing. This is the part that I was like, man, I've been thinking about it for several years. I hear a lot of people say, oh gosh, your birds are great and all the things. I'm like, thanks. But there's imports out there that are also black mottled. So they obviously don't adhere to the APA standard for Brahmas. But what's going to set me and my efforts apart from anyone else who's been doing this? I don't know. For me to let go of this project and allow my birds to go somewhere, like I haven't allowed exhibition or any kind of quality leave my farm. I'm just not there yet. I'm not ready. I don't want to perpetuate poor quality because we're already struggling. The Brahmas in general are just not a super popular breed. So they're already struggling as a whole. I don't know. I told Scott when he was working on his golds, I was like, you go first. And I'm right behind you, buddy. Good job. I think eventually I would really like to partner with breeders that are serious about moving this variety forward. I don't know if it's a pipe dream or if it's realistic, maybe. So where it goes from here, I don't know. The disadvantage to Brahmas and all the project colors that are going is that there is no standard that anyone is adhering to for any of these projects aside from like gold, of course. It's better now than it was 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even. The community is growing. The support is growing. We are in each other's back pockets, supporting, advising, and trying to get there. But truly, all the way up until this point, there's varieties all over the place. There's lace, there's pencil, salmon, all kinds of things. But there's no standard. And if we're not promoting some kind of a standard to draw people to a middle ground, we're just willy-nilly making birds left and right. My goal would be to try to get these guys approved, but man, I just think it's such a stretch to even think that way. But yeah, it would be great if we could. It sure would be great if we could.
We have seriously enjoyed having you on today. It was very eye-opening, actually. I never really thought about creating a whole variety from scratch.
Yeah, it wasn't on purpose. There was actually, during that second generation, when I had a couple Mille Fleur birds that maybe were, that pattern is just, that's a whole nother topic. But during that effort, the imports were starting to arrive on shore and they were starting to really be sold out to whomever and had pockets to spend. And with no agenda and no standard, and people were just reproducing and producing and selling all over the place. And someone had told me, like, it's not even going to matter that you're doing this because these birds are going to be all over the continent in a matter of whatever amount of time. I was like, yeah, that may be true. And that person was not wrong. But all of those birds are not bred to the standard. And then that was the moment where when everyone went left and we're like, we're going to do the import thing. I was like, I'm going. That's the only thing that's going to make any of this different than what you guys have just gotten from across the pond. So that kind of catapulted into this, like I said, short walk off the deep end.
There you go. It takes somebody to start it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere.
We have seriously enjoyed having you today and hope you come back.
I would be happy to come back. Thanks so much for having me. This has been great. I really appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.